His story starts from the beginning of creation, many million years ago, and it is transferred from one generation to another. Once upon a time in a 17th century village on the river bank of then Mali Empire, now known as the Gambia, history was made. The River Gambia is the only living witness to the unjust activity against humanity and the historic set of inhuman and cruelty erected in the heart of the River Gambia. James Island is the evidence. Now you know what I'm talking about. The transatlantic slave trade. More than often, when the slave trade is mentioned, it reminds people of the Roots TV series produced by Alex Haley, the 7th generation of Kunta Kinteh. The Roots monument is found in Jufre village, the home of the Mandingo warrior, Kunta Kinteh.
Kunta Kinteh was the son of Omaru Kinteh and Binta Kinteh. His great-grandfather, Jaliba Kunta Kinteh, originally came from Mali, which was then an empire. While Jaliba Kunta Kinteh embarked on spreading the Muslim faith, he arrived in the Gambia in the 15th century and settled in the southern part of the River Gambia, and then later moved to the small village of Jufre on north bank of the river. Upon arrival at Jufre village, he found the villagers were farmers but always have poor harvest. With Jaliba Kunta Kinteh's prayers, they were able to have a bumper harvest that farming season. Because of this, the villagers convinced him to settle and stay in Jufre, where Kunta Kinteh was born in the year 1750. At the age of 14, he was taken for circumcision, which is known as bush school, where the young initiates were taught the do's and don'ts of the society. Kunta Kinteh became a Maninko warrior, because among all the initiates, he was the only one who was circumcised without crying. In 1767, at the age of 17, Kunta Kinteh was sent by his parents to go and fetch firewood from the forest with his mates. While fetching wood, the young boys saw very strange-looking people, the white men. All the boys but Kunta Kinteh ran away because he wanted to know what kind of people the white men were. He was chased and captured in a place called San Domingo. From there, he was transported across the river to James Island.
This is the Kunta Kinteh Island, the main slave shipping point from this country, where slaves are brought from various parts of the Gambia and they are finally brought here as their final destination before they take into the New World. So this is actually the slave shipping point from the Gambia, where slaves, after being collected from various parts of the Gambia, where they finally brought in before they're taken to the various parts of the world like America, West Indies and Caribbeans, before they're taken to the New World. And slaves were acquired in 3 forms in the Gambia. One was through a form of kidnap, raid and barter, and this involved both sex, men, women, and pregnant women as well. So once slaves are brought on this island here, they've been separated. You have the men and you have the women, and especially those who are pregnant, who were the most viable slaves according to the master in those times of slavery, because at the end of the day they would expect 2 slaves. So once slaves arrived in here, they've been kept in different places. One, this is why we are standing on the map here. That's the why they have, but originally this was the entry point of the island, where the harbor was located because of erosion. That's why it's been moved down there. So where we stand here at this point here, originally, that's where we have the slave yard. This is finally where slaves have been brought in, and at the end of the fortnight, 2 weeks before they're taken out, this is where they've been brought out for display and where they've finally been prepared, and where they also use the brand on them. The brand is to mark them, has the way of identifying them, because according to them, many died along the way, so the white men cannot identify black people. So all what they can do, each master would have to use their brand to mark them before their departure, and they finally put circles on their legs and hands. And then coming down here, during slavery also, we have the women dungeon and we have the men dungeon. This is the other part of the island where women slaves have been kept, especially for those who are pregnant, because they have value to give them more protection and then all one so they can save their revenue. That's why they're separate from the rest of the slaves. But there are slaves also who are very aggressive, who are very revolting, who has never want to go into this unknown world. They don't want to go away from their families. So those people who revolt against the masses, even the time they captured them and the time they are brought on the island before their final departure. People like Kunta Kinteh, that's why, because they've started fighting for their emancipation from slavery. That's why there were kind of dungeons that have been created on the island here, where some of those people end up being put inside, where they start their physical and mental tortures, all because they kept them in some of those dungeons underground, just to give them physical and mental, why they will get them starving, dehydrated, because every day a little amount of food will be given them through a small ventilation with a small window where they will give it. So all this was because they want to get them physically and mentally tortured, so they become weak. At the end of the day, when they're transported, they wouldn't have the strength anymore to cause any revolt, because revolt on the ships will cause so many slaves who died along the way, so that will bring great loss to them. So this continued. The island has been moving from one country to another up to 1830, because after so many thousands of African people or millions of Africans who have been enslaved, according to after our kings are far going, the white people, they are fond of using their people in their own history, so they wouldn't recognize the black people. Our ancestors, the kings, some of these kings started fighting to abolish slavery in their kingdoms, so nobody's coming from their kingdoms to be taken into slavery. So there later we have European powers also coming up, places like Britain and other places. So 1807, when slavery was abolished in Britain, and they start to kind of repatriate, but they arrived in the Gambia here in the early 18th century. But first, when they arrived in the Gambia, one of the first settlement was in the village where they built a point called the Freedom Flag Post. The Freedom Flag Post to enable people who have been adopted in slavery, either on this fort here or other part of the country, once they're able to get down to the mainland here, and lay hand on that Freedom Flag Post, they can be guaranteed freedom. But how many people can swim from here to there? Much more ancestors in those days. But one thing they are proud of was to die in their homelands than taking them to the unknown world. So nobody has to. But after the British been there since 1810, they later realized that the island and the village there was quite far, so many illegal traders would manage to escape and come into the interior of the country and carry slaves and take them. So they have to come and occupy the island here. So as they live on the island also here, finally they realized that Banjul was the right place in the Gambia if one is to succeed in abolition of slavery. So our capital Banjul was therefore found in 1816 when it was called Batos. So in Batos they built a 6-gun battery which is built on 1821 and which was 24-pounded cannons. So they were using those cannons to fight against illegals coming to the Gambia or trying to escape and go out of the Gambia. So a few years later they have also built a fort in Barra, which is called Fort Bull in 1826. So after the success building of those 2 points, in 1830, they finally had to abandon this island to finally move their men from this island here to relocate them those 2 points, and then the island got abandoned. Till in 2011, on the 6th of February, we have another historical moment when the island has been changed to Kunta Kinteh Island, for the simple reason because we feel Europeans were naming the island after their masters, various masters. So Kunta Kinteh has been so important to Gambian history in regards to slavery. So that's why to keep his legacy, the government of the Gambia decided to change his island to his name, Kunta Kinteh Island. That's why today we call the island, formerly has Kunta Kinteh Island since that particular day. So this island is one of the main importance point in this country here in regards to slavery, because it's one of the main settlements in this country here, and even in the time of slavery. So it has served both in slavery, in the abolition of slavery, and until 1830, the final batch of Europeans left this island for Banjul and Fort Blaine in Barra.
Kunta Kinteh Island was the main holding place in Gambia for thousands of Gambian people taken into bondage as slaves. The island was occupied by the British in 1450 and it was abandoned in 1830. Victims were forcefully captured and kidnapped. Men, women and children were mistreated, with some children even being born into slavery. Upon their arrival at Kunta Kinteh Island, a process of separation took place, where the captives were met with aggression, degradation and humiliation before being shoved into small underground cells no more than 3 cubic meters in size. There were reports of instances whereby up to more than 10 people were forced to spend a course of at least 2 weeks awaiting their shipment to another location. Our brave ancestors endured severe physical and mental torture that was inflicted upon them to weaken them before being shipped off like cargo. These acts were committed in order to prevent any rebellious behavior in the journey which would lead to revolt. A huge number of our ancestors died whilst on the journey of no return due to being ill-treated and starvation. Not only this, they were tossed into the sea with no decent burial. Europeans occupied the fort for hundreds of years due to the strategic location of the island, as they no longer faced attacks from local inhabitants. The fort later became a scrambling ground for various powers who sought occupation, from the Portuguese, Colanders, the modern Latvia to the British and the French. The island and its related sites in Gambia represent the presence of Europeans.
Kunta Kinteh, yo Kunta Kinteh. Binta Kinteh, Umaru Kinteh, Jubude Kinteh Kuna, yo Kunta Kinteh. Mañana ya la Binta Kinteh, Umaru Kinteh, Jubude Kinteh Kuna, yo Kunta Kinteh. From the starting, I knew very little about it, very little. I heard when I was a boy, before even Alex Haley came up with the story. In our cultural music, when you're learning it, apprenticeship is from father to son. So we learn a bit of history as they play, our elders play and narrate. That's why we pick. This is what we call remembered history, although it's different from written history, but that's how history is passed on to the young ones in every generation here.
Kunta Kinteh, a brother, Kunta Kinteh, a father, Kunta Kinteh, a grandfather, is a Gambian who lives in the Gambia and was captured in the Gambia, but he did one thing that made him significant in the history of Africa, in the history of the Gambia, and in the history of the black race, and that is resisting control, resisting dominance, resisting the fact that the intention of the people who took him away from us was to erase his identity, and he stood to correct that. And that is why he is significant in our history and significant in our day-to-day affairs.
Hasum Ceesay, HSOUM-CEESAY, the Gambia National Museum. In 2013, the then president made the decision, Yahya Jammeh, to change the name from James Island to Kunta Kinteh Island. Well, of course, no reasons were advanced, but it became clear that it had to do with the history of the island. Because really the island was a very important departure point for slaves who were captured from all the surrounding areas along the river Gambia. And of course, when we mean river Gambia, we mean the entire length of the river. Throughout the present-day Gambia, into today Eastern Senegal and up to the Fouta-Djallon Highlands, where the river rises from. So much or most of the slaves captured within this geographical zone, from the 15th century, up to like the 1820s, it passed through this island. Okay, so the island was like a depot, okay, where slaves would be, brought, they would be marched to the island, waiting for the slave ships, to anchor and then to, transport their cargo.
When Alex Haley came with the story, then I added one. Oh, what I was hearing about people being enslaved some time ago from Africa to America, and then I was also going to school. I was learning from my father, but I was also going to school. I learned this in history about the Atlantic slave trade, the triangular slave trade, goods, or manufactured goods to Africa. They buy slaves or capture slaves and take them to plantations to work. So those plantation goods are taken to be manufactured finally. So it was very little. Although I am not a historian, in my music I am more a poet than a historian, but the little I had from my parents and from my history teachers, I knew about the slave trade, I knew what was going on.
It is a day that we need to reflect on ourselves, our identity, and understand one thing, that the fight of the black person, the fight of the black race, is after our opening up, by giving chance to the outsiders. They come with the intention of dominating us and eradicating our history and making us irrelevant, or to stand straight to be who we are. And that is what Kunta Kinteh was fighting for. When we leave this place today, we should ask ourselves the same question.
Kunta Kinteh left that island in 1767 as a captive on board the ship, the MV Lord Ligonier. These are on record. I am taking the trouble to go into those details, just to tell you that the Kunta Kinteh story is a true story, and he symbolizes one out of the some say 15 million Africans who were uprooted from the continent and taken to the New World as slaves. I mean, his story, came out thanks to Alex Haley's book Roots. After he did some very, very important and very, very exhaustive research in the Gambia between 1967 to the mid 70s, to reconstruct the very, very interesting life of this Gambian, Kunta Kinteh, captured from Jufure in 1767 and sold into slavery in America.
What we need to do now is to stand straight and understand that we as a race have an obligation, and that is to build a race, to build a community that is respected, a community that has dignity everywhere, a community that is identified everywhere, and a community that holds to its civilization and history. We cannot lose this, and days like this provide us the chance to reflect in it, to make sure that our history doesn't fade, to make sure that this history remains, this knowledge remains with us, and it equips us to be better people of the African society. It equips us to be individuals who will take responsibilities and see Africa forward and see the black race forward. This was the battle of Kunta Kinteh, and this is the battle that rests in our soldiers as we are all gathered here today.
When Alex Haley had this story, I think this has taken the country somewhere. The name became a household name for everybody. So was a Gambian, and there is this fantastic story about that Gambia. So me being a mouthpiece of the Gambia should not keep quiet about it. So that's why I said, well, I have to come up with a song, connected with the story, connected with Jufure, where the place I have known when I was a boy. Yeah, and I've gone to the slave trading areas. I have just connected the facts, the ideas together. Mbadima nyomi jufure ngole mukunda kinteh bilinjo zanglu batela yamu jama leta jankata tubabula America banko kan wala di mekumala ba yo dunya bele ngamelo jama waranu bering alexelina ta kumulu kumata yara bang muto nyale tu jon samuluwa dila jama lewa bi America. Ngamay yamen walu dada wala nyama yo jon zamulu madina
Yeah, the island is a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2003. It's really one of the Gambia's pride. We have two UNESCO World Heritage Sites, the stone circles, and the other one is the island. And of course, when you talk about the island, we mean other sites that are linked to the history of the island, like San Domingo, like the CFA building, the Moral Express building, the chapel, Fort Bullen, the Six-Gun Battery at State House. All these, form Kunta Kinteh and related sites. And it is the most popular tourist destination, particularly tourists, from the African diaspora who want to reconnect with the story of, their ancestors, particularly the movement, the forceful movement of Africans from the continent to the New World as slaves.
From Africa to America, yo, Kunta Kinteh. From Gambia to Virginia.
It has happened, and no one can turn back the hands of time. The black population will forever live with it, and the history will be transferred from generation to generation. There will always be once upon a time. However, the physical change of transatlantic slave has been cut and will never happen again.